the nurses always used to like joke, like these two boys are so in sync with each other. Like one of them will alarm, then the other alarms. One of them will alarm, the other alarms. Like they would pull out like one of their tubes, and then the other one would pull out the same exact tube. And so they always had this like connection, and it's really special.
Are you pregnant or a new parent looking to ensure a better postpartum experience? Or are you a birth worker looking to improve your postpartum care skills? Check out Thriving After Birth, an online self-paced course by me, midwife and educator Tanya Tringali. It's 10.5 hours of video content featuring experts in lactation, mental health, pelvic floor health, pediatric sleep issues. You also get worksheets and a workbook, as well as options to have a one-on-one session with me. Sign up at motherwitmaternity.com/thriving, and let's improve postpartum care together. Hey everyone, I'm your midwife, Tanya Tringali. Welcome to the MotherWit Podcast, a show about the issues we, healthcare consumers and providers, face every day as we interact with the medical system. We'll talk about its blind spots, shortcomings, and share strategies we can use to feel seen and heard, no matter which side of the table we sit on. Today's episode is about infant loss. If you are not prepared to listen to this story today, please skip it. Take care of yourself and reach out for help if you are in need. You can visit the resources page on my website or see the show notes attached to this episode. My guest today is Divya Shenoy. She came to me on recommendation of her friend Kristen Ross, who you've heard on Season 3, Episode 1, when she shared her story of exclusively pumping for twins. Divya was also pregnant with twins. She came to me for postpartum care and started early because she knew that the risk of preterm birth was increased in twin pregnancies. Shortly after we began working together, around 23 weeks, she learned that her cervix was shortening and that she required a cerclage. For those of you who don't know, a cerclage is a stitch that's placed into the cervix to help it stay closed and keep the babies inside where they belong. Unfortunately, a few days after her cerclage was placed, her water broke. She spent the next couple of weeks in the hospital so that she and the babies could be monitored closely for the right time to be born. We actually had our first session while she was in the hospital and still pregnant. On January 14th, 2022, she gave birth to two beautiful baby boys, Arvin and Ajay. They weighed less than 2 pounds each. She knew that what was to come was going to be difficult and likely not look like anything she'd seen others go through. But I want Divya to tell the rest of her story on her terms. Divya, thank you so much for your willingness to share your story today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I know we've been through a lot together, actually, even in a short amount of time. And thank you for that introduction and kind of sharing a little bit of my story. I'm excited to tell your listeners more about what we went through as a family and hopefully be able to help others in the future.
Yeah, well, that's definitely why I wanted you to do this. And I knew that from early on, and I thought you'd be somebody who would be willing to do that. And of course, I waited a good long time to ask you to do that.
Yes.
But I'm so grateful. And you've been open and you have shared your stories in other ways and in other platforms. And I'm sure that'll come up in the story.
Yeah.
And there are certain ways that you've shared your story that I want to make sure I link to our show notes so that people can support you and your efforts as well. So I'll make sure to take care of that.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, okay, I gave a little intro just so you wouldn't have to backtrack that much. Introduce yourself and tell us whatever it is that you think listeners should know about you as just a human being in the world. What about your family you want people to know? Before you pick up the story where you feel it's most appropriate.
Yeah, so as Tanya already mentioned, Divya Shenoy. I live in Los Angeles, but I'm originally from New Orleans and Madison, Mississippi, so not really from here. And then I spent a good number of years in DC. So what's unique is I have kind of a network everywhere in the U.S., and that comes into play as I talk about my story and kind of what we went through and who my support system was. So being in LA, I'm lucky to have some family here. My husband's originally from here. But so I think for us, like one thing just to notice, like, we were like, we'll have kids. And then it was like, oh, you're having twins. Like, you're not just having one kid, you're having multiple. And I went through like the gnarliest pregnancy. Like, I was sick all of the time from like probably 6 weeks. We actually found out the day before we left for a trip to Hawaii, and I was sick the entire time I was in Hawaii, all 6 days. And then as I came back, I was sick every day. And so it was definitely a tough pregnancy. So if there are people that are like struggling out there, I'm happy to talk to you about what I did, how I handled it, or just like commiserate with you because it was tough. But then just everything we went through afterwards, just kind of put us on the path that we are now. And we're lucky to have a beautiful son home, Arvin. He is almost a year old, which is insane to me. I like people say like time flies, and I'm like, whatever. No, it really does. I don't know where time has gone. And as you mentioned, Tanya, he was born less than a pound. So he was 1 pound, 11 ounces, and Ajay was 1 pound, 13 ounces, and Arvin is now 16 pounds, 8 ounces, which is like insane to me. It's like carrying around a dumbbell everywhere. So we're super lucky. We're super lucky that we have amazing friends and family. And I definitely want to talk a lot more about that and my support system, because I think it's really how I got through everything that we went through. But yeah, I think, in terms of who I am as a person, I'm a first-time mom, so that's exciting and scary. And for all the other first-time moms out there, like, I know what you're going through. You never feel like you know what you're doing, and that's okay. But yeah, that's kind of me.
Isn't it something to be far enough on the other side of this to say with such confidence what you just said? Like, you just told the world you're not going to know what you're doing, and it's okay.
Yeah, it's nuts to me.
Right? But think about all the time we spend feeling that way before we know it's okay.
Yeah.
There's such a path to go through to get there.
Yeah, I have two of my closest friends, shout out to Amy and Emily, are both either have a newborn or are going to give birth in the next month. And I have told them many times, I have a document for them called Unsolicited Advice, because we all know, like, you want advice from people, but you want advice from the right people. And so we'll talk about that during the episode too. But I found a lot of people, they'll be like, oh, do this. And it's like, I don't think we're going to do that. But then, I think it's a really cool opportunity for you to be able to help your friends and your family. And honestly, for me, it's like, it's even bigger than that, because I had so many people outside of even my tight-knit network who were like giving me advice and helping me, and that I found amazingly helpful.
I'm taking little notes to make sure that we get back to everything, because you've talked about support systems and unsolicited advice, and I'm so interested in your unsolicited advice that this is a platform for you to share your unsolicited advice. Okay, so getting us back to the beginning, and I'm not sure if this is exactly the best place to pick up, so please tell me if I'm wrong. But the first thing in terms of a timeline and order of events that picks up from kind of where I left off in my introduction to you that I recall and I think has merit is a brief mention, or as much as you want to say actually, about the care you received in the hospital, and kind of through the lens, because what I remember most is that you felt one way about the care you were getting when you were still pregnant. We call that the antepartum unit in hospitals, when somebody goes in but they're not in labor and we're trying to keep them pregnant. And the care really changed as soon as the babies were out and you had a different experience. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So as you mentioned, I was in the high-risk L&D unit for about 3 weeks. And that was when they were trying to keep me pregnant. So I was going through everything possible. And I had an amazing OB who was just like the most supportive human being. She came to see me every single day. She did everything she could to keep these little babies in me. So I was on a mag drip. I had steroids to help their lung growth, everything under the sun. The nurses, day and night shift, were so amazing. And my husband was with me every single day. He spent every single night with me. And they were also amazing to him. And they were just like so wonderful. They took care of us. They really, like one day, my hair was just like a rat's nest. Like it was so gross. And one of the nurses was like, you want me to brush that? Because like she knew my husband couldn't brush it properly. So I got my like Tangle teaser and she sat next to me in the bed and like brushed my hair out. And then I showered and washed it. And it was like just nice to feel like a human being, you know, like living in the hospital is not ideal. And I'm sorry for anybody that's had to do it even longer than 3 weeks. It's tough. Like you don't have a normal life and a routine. But so that was like just during that time, I actually did feel somewhat normal though. Like it was like we kind of started to get ourselves into a routine of like, this is what's going to happen. We started to get to know the nurses really well because they would come in all the time to monitor the boys. We got to know like the environmental services staff. So the person who was helping to clean our room, the engineering staff who was fixing things when I inevitably broke like the paper towel machine. And it was just really nice. It felt like, okay, we like have people that we know, we're being cared for, we're being really taken care of. And then I went into labor in the early morning of January 14th. And then I went into postpartum afterwards. And my whole labor was like, obviously it was challenging. It was very scary. It was an emergency C-section. But when I left and I went to the postpartum unit, I will say it was tough, like especially not having babies with me. I did feel treated differently. I felt like I was just like put in a corner. I did get a very large room, which was really nice of them. But like I was put in a corner, and then I remember one time like I didn't get water for like a long time. And finally my husband was like, I'm just going to go up and ask them to fill up the cup at the station. And I was like, okay. And I understand. I know that they're like overworked and a lot's going on, but it just was really tough. And I think for me, like I was just going through so many emotions. You were actually the one that pointed it out to me that like you had a traumatic birth. And I was like, oh shit, I did have a traumatic birth. Like I didn't think of it in that way, but to not have that support and that care, it was tough. That being said, like the other part of that is that my sons were in the NICU, and I got to see the way that they were treated and how amazing the staff was. And so I think for me, it was like, I know I needed to get through that postpartum time and honestly stay in it as long as I could because it was the closest I was going to be to my sons. But for me, like, I was hurting and like I would be in pain, but it was also like the motivation of like, gotta get up to the NICU. Like there's no option. So the other thing that I think was really tough for me, I think a lot of moms can relate to this once they've had a baby and been in the labor or the mother baby unit or postpartum, whatever they call it, is the pumping aspect. So I remember being like, I know I need to pump. 'Cause Kristen, my muse, Kristen has helped me with so much. And you and I had talked about this. Like I was planning to pump, like, great. They literally were like, here's a pump, go. And I was like, what do you mean here's a pump, go? What do? I don't know. Like, where do I put these? Like, I don't know what this is. And like, I was like, holy crap, I have no idea what I'm doing. And so the next day I talked to the lactation consultant, but again, no hate, no shade to them, but like they're busy and they did not have the ability to support me as an exclusive pumper at the time. I felt like they focused on the moms with babies there that were nursing. And so that was tough. And it kind of, in the moment, it really didn't help. I was already in a very challenging headspace. It did not help me to feel like I didn't have people that were like knowledgeable enough to help me in the actual unit. And that was tough for sure.
And that's a real shame for reasons beyond, I think, what most people are thinking about when I say that. It's a shame because preterm babies benefit from human milk so much more than even full-term babies.
Yeah.
And so knowing how valuable that human milk is to preterm babies, you would think that they would be all over you, wanting to help you get your milk out of your body and get an adequate supply for those babies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was tough. I mean, at some point, I decided, once I had gotten home, I decided to seek outside help. And that was incredible. I used a company called My Nursing Coach that's based here in LA, and they came out to, I kind of told them like I had a unique situation because, I don't think they typically work with exclusive pumpers. They like kind of do a mix of both, and don't quote me on that. I might be wrong. But for me, I just had a unique situation, and they came to me like literally the next day and were like, we're here to help you. And that was what I needed. Because as you know, like I needed to start establishing a pumping schedule, and then also knowing, okay, I've got to be in the NICU. Like, how do I balance that time? And it was just so nice to have somebody sit with me one-on-one and help me do these things and try to help me understand what's going to make my life easier. How am I going to be able to do this in order to benefit my children?
Have you encountered confusion and anxiety when it comes to feeding your baby? Whether you are in the prenatal stage or are already feeding your baby, I would love to partner with you so that you feel at ease about the feeding choices you make for your baby. My name is Lo Nigrosh. As an internationally board certified lactation consultant, I can combine my expertise of hormones, milk supply, and infant and parent physiology with your expertise of your family situation to help you feel more joy and less frustration while feeding your baby. You can find all my information at my website at www.quabbinbirthservices.com.
We hope you're enjoying the Mother Wit podcast. If you are, please rate us and leave a review in iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to your podcast. Thanks so much. Now, back to the show.
Tell us a little bit more about what it was like as you adjusted to a life that involved pumping a lot and navigating between, well, obviously it's the first few days you were in the hospital. I guess you probably only stayed 4 days, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think I think my OB snuck me in a 5th day, which was really nice of her.
Okay.
I remember her being like,
Good.
I don't want you to leave yet. And I'm like, I want to get out of here because I told you the way I was being treated. But then it was like, once I left and I had to like physically get myself back to the hospital, I was like, oh man, thank goodness.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like, one side has a set of burdens and the other side of the equation has another set of burdens.
Exactly.
So you get home and suddenly you realize, oh my gosh, I have all this pumping to do, and I'm either at home and not near my babies, or I'm in the NICU. And I think I recall that you struggled to figure out how you could pump, or could you even pump while you were at the hospital, which seemed kind of absurd to me. I remember really struggling to understand why that was so hard. But tell us a little bit about the challenges of going back and forth and trying to fit in the pumping and all of that.
Yeah. So it's kind of crazy now to think about like how much time we spent either in the car or at the NICU, because we spent a lot of time. And so for me, your listeners don't know this, but I am like very, very type A. I live on a schedule. I live on a to-do list. I am so task oriented. Like, this is just how I am. So for me, having like no sense of anything, never knowing what was going to happen, never knowing, like, even with the boys, like, okay, were they going to have a blood transfusion? Okay, that changes everything else that's going to happen. And they try to be on a schedule in the NICU too, but you can't control what's going to happen with your little ones. Like, it's just, they do what they want to do. And so for me, it was trying to establish like, okay, I'm going to pump especially in the beginning when I was trying to establish my supply, I tried to say, okay, I'm going to pump every 2.5 hours. And I was on a very strict schedule, and I had to literally center my life around it. So if I was going to need to pump, I couldn't be in the car because at that time I didn't have any sort of mobile pumping option. And I wasn't comfortable. Like, I wasn't comfortable pumping in the car because, like, your boobs are out. You don't know that yet. You know what I mean? Obviously, you've just given birth and all that stuff. So you're one level above what you used to be with your comfort. But I still wasn't there. And then when it came to being in the NICU, the reason why it was tough to pump there is there was a million things going on. And I'll try and share a picture with you so you can show it to your listeners of like what our room looked like. But with 2 giraffe units, which is what they called called like kind of the area where the babies are, they were huge. They took up so much space, and there was always 2 nurses in the room. It was just like chaos in there. And so for me, trying to establish my milk supply, also not knowing what the hell I'm doing pretty much still, it was tough. It was a tough mentally for me to be like, okay, I am in an okay space to pump in this area. And I was literally pumping on like the most uncomfortable chair. I like didn't know what even like my flanges like weren't fitting properly yet. I don't even think I had like a hand free bra yet. Like it was just a lot of things at one time. You know what I mean? It's just it never felt like I was comfortable there until later on. I think I established with myself, once I knew the nurses a little bit better, and it was kind of like, you know what? I can't live and die on this schedule. I've got to do, your boobs are going to tell you what to do. At some point they're like, my milk is here, and it's like, you've got to pump now. And so I think mentally I just learned to break that down to say, you know what? It's okay to be in this space. If I really need privacy, I'll ask the male nurse to step out, or I'll ask the doctor to not be in there, or I'll tell the nurses, hey, I'm going to pump. I'm going to close up everything. One of my friends, Olivia, actually ended up sending me a cover so that I could like pump in the room and feel more comfortable like that. Because again, I got thrust into motherhood and pumping and all these things like very early. So I didn't even know you could like buy a cover that would cover you entirely and you could feel comfortable in. And so that's kind of how I was able to like break it down and really get myself to pumping. And then it turned out like by the end of the journey, I think every nurse in the unit had seen my boobs. So it was like, whatever. But, at first it was definitely like I was a little self-conscious, but it was also like I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't feel comfortable yet.
Yeah. So tell us what else was going on in the NICU, because both boys had their ups and downs.
Yeah.
And it was a struggle, and it was touch and go for both boys.
Yeah.
So tell us, I know this is the hard part of the story for probably you to tell and probably for listeners to hear, but tell us a little bit about what some of the challenges were.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's funny, when you were doing your introduction, I was like kind of starting to get teary, and I'm like, this might happen again. So, Arvin and Ajay actually, like, I mean, shockingly enough, Arvin was actually the one we were more worried about to begin with. He was born first and smaller, and he was the one that, I had a ruptured membrane, and it was Arvin. So they were die twins. So they had their own sacs, they had their own placenta, and Arvin was actually the one who ruptured. So he was smaller, his lungs were more, more, I don't know the right word to say, not like ineffective, I guess could be the right word to say here, but it's like his lungs were more susceptible to being,
they were less pliable is what I'm assuming is one of the things. So the lungs really have to do all this work to become expansive. So yeah, they were less pliable, they were less mature. There's a few different
less
words
mature. That's mature is the right word, I think there. Thank you. So, we were worried about Arvin. So when Arvin was born, he was born first. He was immediately put on the vent. Like there was no question, like he needed that support immediately. And they were on what's like called an oscillator. So an oscillator is, it's a very, very, very high frequency. It essentially is breathing for them. Ajay actually was not on the oscillating air at first. So he was born second, and they were like, he was actually doing okay on his own to start. And then as time went on throughout that day, he ended up needing to be put on the oscillator as well. So they were both born obviously extremely premature. So they're what's called a micro preemie. And that is any baby born under, I believe, 1,000 grams. So, it was touch and go for both of them in the very beginning. And I think for me, like, I, again, was in just such a space where it was like, I can't believe this even happened. And then on top of that, having to take in all of the different things that were going to happen with them and all of the different like risks that the doctors were talking to us about and everything that was going on. And within the first couple days, I mean, it's crazy to think back. And I actually like created a Google Doc that I would keep updates in just for myself, really. But then I ultimately would share them with like my parents or my friends because people would ask me how they're doing. And like, it was such a rush when they would tell us. It was like the laundry list of things that were wrong with each of the boys or could go wrong with each of the boys was like, I mean, miles long. So to begin with, you know, both of them had, obviously the lungs were extremely underdeveloped. They both had what's called like a PDA, which is essentially like an opening in their heart. So those were the two major things. One thing that we ultimately found out was that they each had IVH, which is interventricular hemorrhages in their brain. So there's different levels of those, from 1 being the least severe to 4 being the most severe. They were somewhere between a 1 and a 3. And they both had them on each side of their brain. So everything that you can think to be wrong was pretty much wrong, which is crazy to think about. So every single day it would be like, hey, we're going to do a blood transfusion. Do we have consent to do this? Hey, we need to do platelets. Do we have consent to do this? Like, just, it felt like we were never going to get past things. And that was really hard. You know, it was like every day you go in and, I come from a family of 2 doctors, and I have more doctors in the family. So, you know, they're asking me all these medical questions. Like, I don't know what's going on. I can't even like wrap my brain around it some days. So that's why I started to take the notes to really help myself be like, oh, these are the things, and this is what the potential solutions are for them. This is what the treatment plan is going to be. And for me, and I would say for any NICU parent, or honestly, any parent that has a child with any sort of health, like, yeah, it's going to be overwhelming. You might not be a doctor. You might not have any clue what they're talking about, but like, you are your child's advocate. So you're the only person that is there every single day for your kid. And so honestly, like, it's so funny. I'm not a doctor. My parents knew that was never in my path, but I went to rounds every single day. If I couldn't make it in, or like I was running late, I would call them and be like, I'm running late, call me. And I would be on the phone. And the reason why is because at our hospital, they actually rotate the doctors every 24 hours. So they do 24-hour shifts. So the doctor the next day is not the same. You are the only constant. And so sometimes I would be the one being like, oh, this is actually what happened during rounds. And so I would be the one to be like, you know, oh, we talked about this yesterday. What's the update on that? What's going on? And so, and not just me, my husband too. My husband is incredible and has been there through every step of the way as well. But so to me, it was so important because like we had to keep up as much as everybody else in that room that was taking care of them. We had to make sure that we were on top of things because as we did start to see some of their health declining, so this is gonna get tough. But so a couple days in, Ajay was actually they noticed some green bile that was coming out of one of the tubes that was helping him to get his food. And so they were, and at that time it wasn't really food, it was more like liquids. So they noticed this green bile. One of the nurses just happened to notice it one night, and they ended up kind of looking into it a little bit more, and they decided that they needed to perform a surgery on him. So they had the pediatric surgeon come in and consult, and he actually needed to have a Penrose drain inserted because he was having some issues in his liver. And so he was like, I think at that point, like a week old. It's just like insane to think. Like he was a week old. He weighed less than 2 pounds, like to have a surgery. And so he had to be isolated. He had to have the surgery. It was performed like within an hour or two. But basically they inserted a drain into his liver to drain out this additional fluid that was in there. And, everything went well. He was, doing okay. at the time, again, they're both still on this oscillating air, and the goal is to get them off the vent. So that's like, the goal is always to have them off the vent. But then they have an open PDA, which is the heart condition. They have the brain bleeds. It's like there's so many things happening at one time, and trying to help like understand what's the priority here. And for Ajay, that was a priority. It was like he had to have this done, even though it was so scary to think of him being that little and having a surgery. It was like, this needs to be done. Because of that surgery, he was put on like triple antibiotics, like anything else that was going to potentially happen with him had to be delayed. So the goal was to close the PDA, because if they closed the PDA, that could potentially help with some of the blood flow and the breathing and et cetera. But for him, they couldn't do that. And then the brain bleeds, typically the treatment was to do Advil. They couldn't do Advil for the PDA closure because the brain bleeds. It's like everything just interfered with one another. You know what I mean? And that's the other thing, is like not being a medical professional or having a child that has so many things happening. It's just, it seems like at times it would feel like nothing was ever going to go right. But contrary to that, actually, Ajay started doing better. He was doing a lot better. Arvin was doing well too, actually. They were starting to show signs of like, okay, Arvin was able to do a treatment with Tylenol to help close the PDA. So that was wonderful. We were seeing some closure in there. And the brain bleeds were remaining stable, which is great. They weren't increasing as their head sizes increased, or they weren't growing or having any sort of issues there. So that was great. But with Ajay, it was like this issue with his liver was still there. As he started to get better and things started to close, he wasn't having as much fluid. They were like, okay, it was their 1 month birthday actually. And we had a family conference, and we were like, oh, things are like looking better. Like actually, both boys have been doing well. They've been kind of following the track that we expect. We're actually thinking about extubating them in the near future and putting them on high flow oxygen instead. Arvin decided that he wanted to extubate himself. He did not want to wait. So he actually, February 16th, he actually extubated himself, and they were like, maybe let's keep it this way. And Ajay had been doing well. His oxygen has actually been showing that he was showing signs of breathing above the vent. So maybe he could do it himself. But he, at some point, I think it was like, maybe 2-3 weeks in, he started showing like this, like these skin issues, and nobody could figure out what it was. We had the infectious disease team come in. We had the surgeon come back in and look at it. It was just, nobody knew what it was. They had taken samples, like it wasn't showing any signs of, growth or anything. So nobody knew what it was. They thought, oh, maybe it's just like eczema. And ultimately, like, that started to get very, very bad. So he started to have, like, his stomach was like bright red, like just extremely red. It was starting to be a little distended. And that was all on like February 14th February 14th to the 16th. And so the day that Arvin extubated himself and was kind of on a high that day, he was doing really great. We got a call that Ajay was just really not doing well, and he was actually in critical condition. And it just felt like things turned so quickly. Because like I said, their 1 month birthday, February 14th, it was like, things are actually looking up. Like, we're kind of on the right path here. But Ajay had extremely, extremely low blood pressure, and they had done everything that they could to try and raise that blood pressure, and they weren't seeing any improvement. And they were starting to see that belly be a little distended. So like, kind of puffed out for your listeners that don't know exactly what that means. And he still had that redness to his skin. It was so so challenging to look at. I will never forget, the first time I saw like what he looked like, I just had an absolute breakdown. I was like, something is wrong. So we got a call on February 16th, and they said essentially like, Ajay's in critical condition. We are going to transfer him to CHLA because they have specialists there that are going to be able to help him more than we can at this point. And so I don't even think I understood what that meant at the time, to be honest with you. I don't think I understood how bad it was. And maybe that's because I wanted to mentally just like pretend like it wasn't real. So my husband and I rushed to the hospital as soon as they let us know he was going to be transferred. And basically like we talked to the CHLA staff and they were like, you know, we're going to have to transfer him by ambulance. So, if he is in stable enough condition, one of you guys can come with us. If not, we'll have to put on sirens. We unfortunately can't have anybody. So we're like, okay, sounds good. I'll ride in the ambulance with him. We're good to go. So we went to the hospital. We got there at the same time, actually, as the CHLA staff. And I just can't even, like, explain to you, like, the feeling I had. I felt like I was, like, not really there. Like, I can still remember to this day everyone in the room, and we were used to a lot of people. We always had like 10 people in the room at the time. Like but I just, like, everything drained out of me. It was like something is wrong, and it's not going to be right. And they had to try 3 different medicines to raise his blood pressure and nothing worked. So because of the condition that he was in, he had to be taken, like, with the sirens on and everything. And I will never forget just, like, the horror I felt. Like, it was just, like, not being with your child, and when he's in, like, such a tough situation. I just, like, yeah, it was very, very, very scary. So we got to CHLA, and CHLA brought down to me the magnitude of what was happening. CHLA is an amazing, incredible place. They do the most amazing things, but it's also really scary. If you're a parent and your child is there, you feel helpless is the only word I can think of. It felt like the last resort. And I like really appreciate the staff. They tried to make us feel comfortable. They tried to make everything, you know, essentially at one point, like, we had not slept for like basically 24 hours. And the staff was kind of like, hey, like, you guys might like want to go home, like take a shower, eat something. And like, you know, we're here. This is when we do rounds. This is how the rest of the day is going to go. Call anytime. We're here, but like, try your best to get some rest. And so the night of the 16th, we went home for a couple hours. Like, we went home at 2 a.m. I'll never forget. We went home at 2 a.m. It was the only night we ever didn't go see Arvin. We had been going every morning and every night to see him. Only night we ever didn't go. So we went home for like literally 3 hours. And during those 3 hours, of course, I had to pump. I'll never forget. I'm just like pumping and sobbing. And I went back to the hospital at 5 a.m. and I was there and just through every moment. And like, when I went back, and sorry, this is graphic, but when I went back, I will never forget just seeing he had to have a catheter put in, and it was just blood. And I am the child of a pediatric nephrologist, so I saw that and I was like, this is the end. So we spent the entire day at the hospital, and the doctors were really wonderful and kind and trying their best to help us understand what was going on. But essentially, at one point, my husband had to come a little bit later because he was still working at the time, which is crazy. And he came a little bit later, and the doctor who we were working with was like, the neonatologist was like, maybe we can have a family conference early. And I was like, okay, sure, because we had planned to do it the next day. And he was like, I think we should do it. Let's try to do it today. And now I look back, and he was not so subtly trying to tell us that the condition that he was in just was so poor. And so we ended up having a conversation with him, and my dad was on the phone, and he was telling my dad all of like his vital signs and everything. And my dad was just like silent. Like, he was just so quiet. And so he told us essentially, like, you know, we're going to monitor a little bit longer if we can, you know, if we can keep certain things like above, like if we can keep his blood pressure up, you know, we're managing his pain, everything, you know, we'll see what our options are. We're going to talk to our surgeons. And I was like, okay, don't know what that means. Why does he have to have surgery? But ultimately what happened was that the option was to have him go into surgery. It became obvious that he was having liver failure. And so essentially they were like, we can go in and we can remove parts of his liver that are dead, or we don't know what we're going to find basically when we open him up. So I had mentioned before that he was having those issues. And so basically what we had to do was we had to make a decision. Were we going to have him go into surgery, or were we going to just allow him to continue, you know, to suffer in pain, basically, or were we going to let him pass peacefully? And so to be honest, they kind of made us feel, I kind of at first was like, oh, like we can do the surgery. Like we're going to do the surgery. This is going to be like the right option for us. Like we're going to remove this. It's going to be fine. So we got ready. We set up, like we signed the consent form. They started making his room a sterile environment because he wasn't even stable enough to go into an OR room. And then we talked to our families and we told them what was going on. And my husband and I had this moment and we were like, we have a twin son. Like we have another son who is relying on us. And essentially what we realized in this moment, and this is really hard, and I know not everybody's going to agree with this decision, so just please know that this is the choice that my husband and I had to make for our family. But we had to think about our son and think about ourselves, honestly, and the life that Ajay was going to live with this surgery was so poor. He would basically not have a life. And we also didn't know if he was going to survive through the surgery. So the thought of putting a baby that small through that pain is like really unbearable. And especially as a mom who carried him and loved him and still does love him, I couldn't do it. And so my husband and I turned to each other and we were like, we can't do this. Like he can't go into surgery. Like we can't make him live this life. We can't make Arvin like live this life. And so ultimately we had to make the decision to allow Ajay to pass peacefully. And so we got to hold him for the first time ever, which is insane to think we didn't ever hold him. So the first time I ever held my son was when he was passing away. So my husband actually was the one to ultimately, we were able to have our family come in, which was a challenge because COVID is still rampant. And so, my husband's family was able to come in and be with us during that time because nobody had ever met the boys at that point. They only knew hospital staff. And so they were able to come say hello and say goodbye. And my husband ultimately held him as he passed away. And we were able to get like some footprints and take some photos, which it just is crazy to me. And ultimately he was able to pass peacefully. And it was the toughest decision I will ever have to make in my entire life. But I also know it was the right decision. Because I think about the life that Arvin's been able to have, and it's really because his brother like allowed him to, without having to make that decision. Arvin wouldn't have been able to get like the care that he needs and the attention that he needs to develop into the truly incredible child that he is. And so, I know others have tough decisions that they've had to make, and I still question it to this day. But ultimately, I have to remind myself that I made a choice that I felt like was best for my family. And while it will never be easy, it's ultimately what we decided to do, and what we felt like was right.
I hope. I know I'm probably not right because we live in a strange time and a strange world where people have lots of opinions that they don't keep to themselves even when they should. But I hope that everyone listening can at least empathize with the choice you had to make, regardless of what choice they would make for themselves.
Yeah.
I want to believe that, but I also have a cynical streak, and I'm not sure what people will say, but that doesn't matter. I mean, I understood everything you had to do. I understood at the time every choice you had to make, and you were always incredibly thoughtful and logical, and nothing you had to do during that time was easy.
Yeah.
So I hope people can refrain from judging you in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the days that followed, the days and weeks and months, because boy, was that a journey. You had to balance finding joy in your baby that was starting to make his way home, while you had to feel the loss of another child.
Yeah, so it's honestly like, it was almost like losing Ajay fueled Arvin to like do better. I think he just like knew, he was like, I have such a huge purpose in life, and he started to fulfill that from the beginning. He literally like, it was focusing on him, and I think I put 1,000,000,000% of my energy into Arvin. So like then we said goodbye to Ajay around 10 p.m. We immediately drove to he was at Cedar Sinai. Tarzana is where Arvin was, so we immediately drove to Tarzana and just spent time with Arvin. And I will say we had the most incredible nurse, Carol, who I love her. To this day, like, we think of her as family. She's just one of the best humans. She just like held us. Like, she literally just like held us in her arms. And it was tough because for me, I didn't have my family there yet. They weren't, with us. And so it was really hard. But seeing Arvin just made me really happy. And what I will say with that is that for any other parents of twinless twins, you might not feel that way. You might feel really sad when you see your child, and that's okay. I had to remind myself, like, whatever way I feel is okay. Like, there's not one answer. And so different days, Arvin, to me, always made me happy. And I'm so, so, so lucky that was the case, because that is not the case for everybody. And I 100% understand where they're coming from, because the moments that I wasn't with Arvin, it was not good. I was so sad. I was so unhappy. And mix in losing a child with, oh yeah, I also am postpartum and I have all of the feelings. And so for me, that was when that sadness hit, was when I thought about, oh, I'm not with Arvin anymore. Or honestly, like, even sometimes when I'm with Arvin, some of the milestones, it's like, oh, he's 2 months now. It's like, oh, well, they both would have been 2 months now. Every milestone you have is like, it brings on excitement and sadness. And so balancing that was always tough. And it still is tough. Like, Arvin is turning, their birthday is January 14th. So they will be 1 year old that day. And I don't know what I'm going to feel, and that's hard. And so it's like, sometimes I still don't know how to manage those emotions. But for me, I felt very lucky that when I was with Arvin, the excitement was like just exploding. And that just brought me through so much. And so I had mentioned to you guys, February 16th, Ajay's passing away, first time I ever held him. Literally the next day, because Arvin had extubated himself, I was able to hold him. And so it was such an amazing moment for me to go from the loss of my son to being able to actually hold my other son for the first time. And yeah, it was, I cried a lot. And I think those were happy and sad tears, because, I was like, I feel like I'm holding both of you,
Yeah, you just gave me this image. It just gave me chills, to imagine Ajay passing almost at the same time as Arvin extubates himself and really fills his lungs on his own in a big way. Like, there really was this transition happening between them. And it's very powerful.
Yeah, it's funny. The nurses always used to like joke, like, these two boys are so in sync with each other. Like, one of them will alarm, then the other alarms. One of them will alarm, the other alarms. Like, they would pull out like one of their tubes, and then the other one would pull out the same exact tube. And so they always had this like connection, and it's really special. This is unrelated to like how I've dealt with things, but I think about how to talk to Arvin about this, and do I? And that was a big thing right afterwards, actually, is like, what do we do? And I would tell him everything. Like, I would talk to him about literally everything in my life. And that included his brother that we had lost. I want him to know. And I ask my friends and my family and stuff to talk about Ajay. Like, I don't want it to be this like unknown thing that he finds out later in life. Like, I want him to understand, because I have heard, I don't know because I'm not a twin, but I've heard that they just have this connection that even when they're not there, they're there. And so I want him to know what that little feeling is before, it's too late. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's just crazy.
You want him to always know him.
Yeah, exactly. And the other day, it's so funny. So we have this box that we put a lot of the memorabilia for Ajay into. And so we have this box, and it's engraved with his name. And I put it on our bookshelf outside in our living room recently. And I was feeding Arvin, and he is like just wild in general. He just like loves to talk and whatever. But he kept looking at the bookshelf and staring at it and talking to it. And he has never cared about that bookshelf. He doesn't he's way more interested in other better things in the house, the TV, whatever. But he could not stop. And I was like, oh my God. And we had just brought it back from my in-laws' house very recently. And I was like, oh my God, this is so weird. And I was like, am I making this up? And then I was like, no, I'm not. He literally was like so drawn to it. And it was really special for me, because I always think about, I think my husband and I dealt with loss differently. My husband was so dug into like, we have Arvin, this is the best thing ever that we have one of our boys, we're so happy. And I am too, don't get me wrong. But as a mom, I think I flipped a little bit, and I was always like, I mourned the potential of Ajay, and I still to this day do. And I think that can be really tough. And I try to balance that with, again, like the excitement of Arvin, but it's always the potential of Ajay that I feel sad about, So yeah, still, we're almost a year out, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So I can't say that it's all normal, but, it's a journey. Like, loss is such a journey, and it will never not be. And I think, I so feel for the parents that have lost a child that's a little bit older, that you have even more of a connection with. My heart goes to you. But also the moms who lost a baby that they never got to hold or have. It's like, you mourn that potential still.
Hey everyone, it's me, Tanya, your host here at the Mother Wit Podcast. I sometimes invite my clients on the show to talk about their birth stories and postpartum experiences, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what those clients and I actually do together. I started MotherWit to help people in the perinatal period achieve their health and wellness goals. That means whether you're hoping to conceive and struggling with high blood pressure or high blood sugar, or you're having trouble managing anxiety or depression in the postpartum period, or maybe you just need support and advocacy between prenatal or postpartum visits, I can help. Get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. I'm looking forward to working with you and maybe having you on the show too. Absolutely. Absolutely. No one should ever get to say for anyone else what time of loss it's finally painful, because we all know that miscarriage is painful, right? So it's a spectrum, and there's pain every part of the way. I have one question that's been really sitting with me while you've been telling this story, because of course I'm reflecting back on what I watched happen in real time. I'm wondering if you feel at all, and I don't know if you've just said these words or if I'm taking this completely out of context or what. So just, I'm reframing and then you tell me where the truth is in this. Do you feel in any way that you delayed some of your mourning because you were trying so hard to push it aside and feel the positive feelings that you could feel for Arvin, and then that's why we kind of had that time, which I'll let you talk about a bit, where we kind of fell off the cliff a little bit, and we had to kind of regroup. I mean, I think I felt like I was perhaps always waiting for the other shoe to drop, because you do present, as I'm sure people will, in listening to this episode, hear how much joy just is in your voice, and it took us a little while to get to the harder part of the story, because you come into every conversation with so much love and light. And I feel that from you, even when it's dark times. So I wonder if you can expand upon that a little bit, and the journey that came a little later.
So I can definitely say that the other shoe did drop at some point, but I'm a naturally, I'm a very positive person. I am energetic, I'm outgoing, all those things. And so I think for me, I pushed that all as much as I could. And it was the mixture of Arvin being about to come home and Arvin coming home that was hard. And I hit a wall where it was I don't know how to hold in this grief anymore. And it would come in such strong waves that I didn't know what to do. And it's, to be honest, it was such a mix of postpartum and grief that I didn't even know what was up from that. It was which one am I dealing with? What's really going on here? And sometimes my husband would say to me, and I so appreciate this, he would be like, what is going on? What is the thing that you feel is really making you feel this way right now? Is it Ajay? Is it that your, body is going through these things? You know what I mean? We would try to pinpoint it together and then talk about it. Because if it was Ajay, I mean, he can understand and he feels the sadness. If it's not, I can still talk to him about it. Or he can be like, hey, why don't you talk to XYZ person? Why don't you talk to Tanya? To try and work through some of that. And I think for me, I have a hard time, as open and as outgoing as I am, I have a hard time talking to people about things. And especially in that moment, it felt like nobody understood. And so for me, I went to the NICU staff. They became my therapist. Sorry, guys. And I would talk to them about things, but I think I found comfort in it because they knew Ajay. They were the only other people that had ever met him and spent time with him. And so it was really special to me to be able to talk to them about things. And they were so amazing and so supportive. And I will never forget, the day after I went to the hospital and I was there at, my normal 7 a.m. and everyone was like, what the hell? What are you doing here? And I was like, I have to see Arvin. And the doctor on call that day just came into my room and she just hugged me and she just cried. And I was like, you understand, you understand how sad this is and how sad I am. And you understand because you got to see how feisty my little 1-pound child was, And so that was a way that I found comfort. But to be honest, I don't know when I finally realized I need help outside of just the NICU staff that I'm talking to, or my husband, or even my parents or my friends or whatever. I think I just hit a point where, and I think I texted you and I was like, hey,
yeah,
something's wrong.
I kind of remember how this unfolded. I mean,
you remind me because I don't remember.
Well, the only detail I'm unclear on, and I think you'll clarify it for me, somebody probably from the NICU or the social worker at the hospital, something like that, on that side of the equation, gave you a bunch of resources. And I instantly knew that was going to be totally overwhelming because it was too much. It was great resources, but too much. And I remember saying, let me send them to me. Let me go through them, and I will help you decide which ones are worthy. Based on everything I think I know about you. And so I put little bullets together of that, and then I found other things. And because our work together was so different than the work I was doing with many other families, I just needed to follow you. And so it became clear that you were struggling with a couple things, right? We knew you needed tools, resources, and support. And we had to kind of figure out what in each specific category you needed. So for example, this is something I can't remember whether it actually happened or you were just worried about it happening. When we would look at resources, and part of the reason I did it for you initially was there were certain things you didn't want to hear from people, certain types of niceties or trying to make you feel better. And again, remind me if that actually happened or it was just
No, it did happen.
It did. Okay. So there were certain people in your life who said some things that were meant to be helpful, but they weren't. This is a classic problem when it comes to the topic of miscarriage spectrum all the way to infant loss for people. And so we were trying to figure out how to get you potentially peer support of people who understood, because you knew you couldn't rely on the NICU staff to be your therapist. Yeah. So we got you hooked up with Jen Hampton, one of the therapists that I love working with, who specializes in the perinatal period. And we got you set up with some potential options in terms of whether it was going to be group therapy, peer support, podcasts, books, you name it. So now from there, tell me what you recall and what was working and what wasn't working and how you ended up carving a path out that worked for you.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. So I think in the immediate, when I knew things were I need somebody to talk to and I need them to be reliable, you introduced me to Jen, and that was fantastic. Jen was incredible. I think we only even had one conversation, but it was so helpful and it was so much more insightful than the other conversations I have. And one thing that Jen told me that I would highly recommend, whether or not you have a loss or whether or not you just have postpartum depression, whatever it is, Jen was like, find a space, find a time where you can cry your freaking eyes out. Do whatever you want. But she's like, but listen, if you find yourself laughing out of nowhere, that's grief too. If you're why am I laughing so hard at this? And so my two examples of that is my shower became my sanctuary. I would literally just bawl my eyes out in the shower. Great place to cry. And then I'd come out and I'd be like, I'm renewed. This is great. And my other example was with the laughing was my husband. I can't remember. Oh, he asked me for some mints in the car on the way to the NICU one night. And I kept grabbing our garage door opener. And I just could not stop laughing. I was dying. I thought it was hilarious. And Jen said that to me, and then it clicked and I'm like, oh, this is me dealing with my grief. And it's just so silly, but it's so nice to have a moment where you do laugh or you're this is funny. And that's also where I would have those moments with Arvin, he would do something silly and I'd just giggle. I'd be this is hilarious. Or I would go cry in the shower and I would be this is my happy place, So I think that was awesome. The other, I think the other resource that I found to be incredibly helpful was an organization called Hand to Hold. And they're a NICU support organization. They have an app, they have a website, they have peer mentors. I just applied to be one actually. so amazing. The peer mentorship program, you tell the coordinator exactly what you're going through, exactly what's happening, and they matched me to a woman who we were talking and she was like, yep, same situation. Yep, like everything aligned. But she had gone through this entire ordeal 7 years ago. And talking to her, I felt like I was looking in a mirror, but at a wiser human being than me. And it was so wonderful. And she would check in on me. And when Arvin came home, she was like, what's your setup look like? This is what we had to do. This is what, and it was just so nice to have a person who truly understood start to finish what my situation was like. And the other thing that I found very helpful was I actually was connected through our NICU, I was connected to a couple of moms who had longer term NICU babies. So Arvin was in the NICU for 118 days, almost 4 months. And so our NICU discharge coordinator connected me with other moms who had longer term babies that had been in the NICU so that I could talk to them and understood. And honestly, like talking to them post NICU was incredibly helpful. They helped me to understand what life could look like. One of them happened to have lost a twin also. So she and I were able to connect on that. We've talked about like future things, what, her relationship with her spouse, her relationship with her child, like how she talks to him about, their lost son. Those things were so incredibly helpful for me. Those two specifically, I think.
Are you still in touch with her?
Yes, I'm still very close to them. Yeah.
Great. Great.
What I did not find as helpful was like, I hate to say it, but like there was a couple Facebook groups that I joined thinking like, oh, mothers of twinless twins. There is a preemie group that I think is wonderful called Preemies on Oxygen. And that's more of like, I would say, helpful because of like the questions that you can ask other moms and dads who have a child, or caretakers, I should say, who have had a child come home on oxygen, and they're just like super great and like can answer questions, can talk through tough situations with you, whatever it is. But some of those like less helpful Facebook groups, and one of the reasons was I was in a group for twin parents, and a lot of the parents were really, really sad. And that's okay. Like, there is nothing wrong with, like I said, some parents see that differently. But for me, seeing that sadness so prominently made me think, is it wrong that I'm not sad all the time? Like, is it? And it made me question my emotions and my feelings. And that was tough. And I did not like that feeling. And so I had to just kind of like mute that group. And I think I ultimately ended up leaving it. Again, those parents deal with their loss in the way that they want to. I think that's wonderful. Find whatever is best for you. It was not best for me. Some people also, I have two amazing friends in Los Angeles. One is Kristen, who you know and who your listeners have heard before, I joke with her that she's my motherhood guru. I text Kristen and ask her all of the questions. My other friend is Vanessa. She also has twins. Some people would find it really hard to talk to them or to be around them because they have twins. I don't. I love it. I like see those interactions and I know those parents, and I think I tell them all the time, I'm like, you are superhumans. And I love the relationship that I have with them because it has helped me. They've seen me. They still will say like, oh, you're still a twin mom, and they have known me from before when I was carrying both of the boys to now when we just have Arvin with us here. And so those have been the resources that I have found to be like the most helpful. And then just honestly, I mentioned it before, but like the support that I have from my friends and my family, I could not even tell you, like I wouldn't be here. And I say that very seriously without them. They are the people that have kept me going day in and day out. And my husband, of course, he's incredible and I love him. And we have been through the worst and the best together. But like that network of family and support that we have, like they kicked in on day one. When they heard that I was in the hospital, I got like 7 million care packages. The hospital staff was like, what is happening? What are you like? Do you actually live here now? Because they sent me like books, coloring books, like things to like play with, like just random stuff, because that's what they did. They sent my dog food so that he got fed. You know, they sent us a meal train so that we had food that was not just hospital food. It was just like incredible. And it's my friends from high school, it's my college friends, it's my grad school friends, it's my work friends. I just like, I don't even understand what I would do without them. They've been the most amazing people that remind me every day of how strong I am, because I don't think I do it myself. They're the people that have kept me going and really kept me like so excited for everything that we have to experience in life moving forward.
Wow. That's incredible. Divya, the arc of you telling this story, which as I understand it, this is the first time you've sat down and kind of told it start to finish in this way. It's so interesting to me, and it really speaks to who you are as a human being, and it's very in line with what I've seen from you and all the time I've known you now, almost a year, in that, you know, you started on this like happy note, you were like giggling, and I was like, I don't even know how we're going to get into this story. I don't know how to do it. It felt like a game of double dutch. I didn't know how to dive in.
Keep you on your toes.
And, you know, eventually we dove in, and I mean, yeah, you sure do. And, you know, I'm sure our listeners can possibly hear in my voice. I mean, I'm sitting here listening to you, getting weepy, trying to keep it together. And here we are now on the other side of your story, and you're back to, you know, being bright and bubbly and laughing. And I admire you so much for your ability to, not only the way you have navigated the entire experience, not that it's over, but you know what I mean, to this point, you know, the way you manage the ups and downs. And like when you said the thing about the Facebook groups where everyone was sad and it made you question yourself, I totally get that.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. And I would always tell people, people would ask me, how are you doing? I'm like, don't get me wrong, I'm sad. But at the same time, I find so much joy in my son and the people around me. And I just kind of let that fuel me, because I can't live in that sad space. It's just not for me, you know? And I'm sorry for people that do and don't want to be, you know? Because it's unfortunate and it's tough to get out of it, you know?
Yeah. But you were always ready to tackle it when it felt too heavy, when there was too much heaviness on one side of the equation. You were like, what can we do now? What can we throw at this that we haven't yet? And there were times where the answer, whether it was from me or any of the number of supports that we've just discussed, probably looked at you and said, sometimes we just have to sit in that heaviness and feel both opposing feelings, right? Because that's motherhood and parenthood across the board, no matter what happens in one's experience. There is, and I've said this a million times on the podcast, there's a way in which one of the biggest things we're learning as we grow into this new phase of adulthood that involves parenting is holding a positive emotion and a negative emotion at the same time.
Yes.
And I just think people who have an experience like yours learn that on a level most of us don't know anything about, but it's the same skill.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, I've learned to be more flexible and adaptable, and you can ask my mom. Again, I mentioned I'm a very type A person, but like in the past, I probably would have been like, you have to do this way, or this has to be this way. And I've learned how to like just kind of not go with the flow. I still can't go with the flow, but at least I'm more like able to flex to the situation and to let things go a little bit and like be a little bit more easygoing than I used to be, because I have to. And I've had to like deal with things that I couldn't control. And so I have to let go of that. And it's been actually really nice for me to mentally be able to do that. So yeah.
I think that's what many people these days are calling giving yourself grace.
Yeah.
And that looks different for everyone, but somebody who identifies as type A as you, who is as addicted to structure as you are, that is like the ultimate giving yourself grace. So that might not be somebody else's grace, but it's yours.
Exactly. That's so true. Yeah, I think it's been a journey, and it's going to continue to be, but for me, I'm lucky that I have people around me who love and support me. You being one of those people, you have connected me to so many resources, and some of the things that I'm talking about, I wouldn't even know what they were without you. But I think that was the other piece, and this is honestly some of the advice. I told you my unsolicited advice. One of the things that I tell people is like, get a postpartum specialist. Like, don't try to do everything by yourself, because you're going to feel things and you're going to think things and you're going to, and you just need somebody who's an expert. Yeah, you can talk to your friends. Yeah, you can talk to your family, but you need somebody who is like unbiased to focus on you. And so I think that's where that also helped me a lot, is knowing that I had you to support me and all the resources that you could connect me with, which was like invaluable to me.
Thank you so much for saying that. I mean, in all truth and honesty, there are ways in which I was flying by the seat of my pants with you, but that's the nature of the work that I have set out to do. I think I'm in uncharted territory, even in normal situations. This degree of virtual care that is so human intensive, despite it being virtual. No, I don't know anybody else doing it. If you're doing it and you're listening, I want to hear from you, because we need to talk and, figure out what pieces of what work best. But I don't know anybody else who's doing this. And all I know is that I have such a real connection with everyone that I work with, even when my inner voice says, oh shit, you're out of your league now.
It's taking the burden off of somebody, though, to be like, hey, I know you have to be in the NICU for 6 hours and you can't be sitting on your phone looking at resources. Let me look into what I think is a viable thing for you and going to help. Or even not even, you didn't have to give me your opinion. You just told me, here's like an overview of what this is and how it could help you, what it might be challenging about it.
What you have shared with people today is absolutely invaluable. And that's the range from just your real life experience and the emotion that comes with it, along with the breakdown of the resources and what worked and what didn't work for you. I cannot thank you enough for your time and for sharing so openly.
Yeah, of course. And just the last thing. So the one group I didn't thank, but I hope they already know, and this can be challenging for NICU parents, is like recognizing the people that are in the NICU. I think for us, they became our family. And so as I was talking about that support system, they really became the people that we went to. I mentioned they were like my therapist, but like not just that, they were our family. And I just can't imagine our journey without them. I know how much they love and support us. They check in on Arvin all the time. They check in on us all the time to this day. It's just amazing to have that level of care and support. And we wouldn't be where we are today without them. So I have to say thank you to them too. I know it can be tough as a parent, again, finding your place in the NICU, but just know that like you are a member of the team, and that's your role, is to be part of that NICU team when your child is there.
Didn't you start a fund in your son's name for that NICU?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, so, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I have wonderful friends and family who were like sending us all the things in the world. Like we got like 17 flower bouquets and like candy and cookies and everything. And I'm like, okay, we gotta get this funding to something else. And so we decided to actually start as part of the Cedars-Sinai Tarzana, they have a foundation, and we actually asked our friends and family to donate towards that foundation, specifically to the NICU, in honor of Ajay. They were the people that helped us safely bring home Arvin, and they were the people that took care with all of their hearts to take care of Ajay. So we wanted to be able to recognize him and recognize their hard work. So I think last I heard we had raised like over $6,000 for the NICU, which is awesome. And it's really all to our friends and our family. But for us, it's just like a way to give back to them and for them to be able to get the things that they need to help support the NICU and NICU families, because it's a tough journey. It's not easy being a family that's staying there, and I think just being able to help them in any way possible is really important to us.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to share that in our show notes. If there's any other specific links or resources that you want our listeners to have, you send them my way, and I will make sure everybody gets them.
Yes, happy to. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that I was able to talk to people I mean, you're an incredible resource, but just know, I mean, like everyone says this and it sounds so, but like you're not alone. You really aren't. There are other people. They might not have the exact same situation as you though. And it's okay to know that your situation is unique, but know that there is support for that situation as well.
Absolutely. And you said at the beginning that you were open to talking to people. So
Yes.
I will make sure that we provide whatever the appropriate contact information that you want us to share.
Yeah, definitely.
Give everybody a big kiss for me.
I will.
Thank you for listening to the Mother Wit podcast. If any of the issues we discussed today resonate with you or your experience, I'd love to hear from you. Leave me a voicemail at 917-310-0573, or better yet, email me a voice memo at tanya@motherwitmaternity.com. I really want to hear what worked for you, what didn't work, what support you'd wished you had, how you got through the tough times, how you advocated for yourself, or especially any tips you want to share with our listeners. I want to hear all of it. And if you'd really like to work together, you can get a discount on your first consultation with me at motherwitmaternity.com using the code FIRSTCONSULT 10% off. That's 10% symbol, all one word. Okay, that's all. It's wonderful being in community with you all. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.
And remember, listeners, nothing we discuss on this show should ever be considered medical advice. Please speak to your local provider about anything that comes up in this show that resonates with you and your needs and your health care.